Hello, everyone, again, and welcome to the Monday Majlis. We are already 21 here, and people are continuously coming. It's my greatest joy to welcome Isabel and Jens. And I start with telling how I knew them. In the case of Jens, it is really funny, because that was the most awkward situation, but I think there are interesting lessons there. So I met him in Göttingen when we applied for the same job. And it's to the greatest glory of the University of Göttingen and Sebastian Günther, who advertised the job, that we had our dinner, all of us together before the interview, and we are friends since. So they managed to manage such a tense situation that in spite of being a competition, we became friends. And another anecdote, which may be interesting for those who are at the beginning of the career, to what sort of questions we can get at such an interview. I remember I went in, I gave my talk, and there was Sebastian, and then a bunch of old academic lions, and then these lions were looking at me, and then they asked me, so what would you do with this whole project? I mean, not with Marapad, but it was an immense project, not just in Islamic culture. And then I was like, Saman Vatat, and I will follow what you say, but I will do what you say. And then they said, no, what we should do. And then I said, oh, so if you want, no, I didn't say, but I thought, so if you want me to have a whole plan for the whole thing, then would you please give me some time in advance? Anyway, I went out, and then I met Jens. Jens, did they ask me that? And then Jens told me, yes, me too. I had no idea what to say. Anyway, Göttingen became much richer by having Jens there, and I became much richer by having Jens as my friend. And then I met Isabel much later online in some presentation about Kalila Vadimna and follow-up works of Kalila Vadimna. Actually, both Jens and Isabel, we will re-invite them for their own research in the future. And then I had the joy to meet Isabel a month ago in person and learn more about her. So yes, I silence myself and let you to discuss this monumental work what you produced together.
So Istvan, thanks a lot, Isabel. Sorry to jump in. After these kind words, I feel obliged to pass at least some kind words back. Thanks a lot, Istvan, for having us, for even virtually bringing us to Exeter. We met on the Deutsche Orientalistentag, and immediately we said, yeah, we'll do this presentation. So thanks from my side. I'm sure Isabel will add to this, and with this I hand over. Isabel, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, of course I wanted to say thank you. I know you like quite a lot of time from the text that you produce, and I really have profited a lot from all your many works on this early Abbasid time in Baghdad, by the way, partly in Baghdad at least, because Ibn Muqaffa is always seen as an Abbasid guy, and he's not really an Abbasid. At least he's not one of Baghdad. It's interesting because many of the texts later on put in Baghdad, so that's so there is a connection there. Anyway, so thank you very much for this, and I'm happy to be here. And yeah, we prepared a presentation where we'll tell you a bit about how the making of the book came along, so how this book was produced among both of us, and then we will give you a kind of overview on the book, so that you, in case you have the book at some moment in your hands, it's a very thick volume, you are able to navigate easier and know what kind of topics are discussed and which not, for example. And then, as Jens has said, we will move on with some kind of sections, like more thematic text section on one topic that is of interest. So I will share my screen, and I hope everything works well. So I have to do here. Okay. Do you see? Well, I'm sorry. No, you should see things.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. So, yeah. And now I move to the next. Okay. Yeah, it moves. Okay. Yeah. So, Jens has already said many thanks for this event. So, and I will speak to you a bit about this book. That is the book we want to speak about. That is partly the product of a conference contributions and of many additional scholars. And as has been announced in the title, it took a lot of time, and I will tell you a bit about this. So first of all, the book is the result of the cooperation between many institutions and many scholars and colleagues. And of course, for this commitment and patience, we always want to, again and again to say our thank you. And there are several institutions. So it was the CRC Idris, which is a kind of research network that was financed by the German Research Foundation in the context of the Excellency Initiative. Then we have the cluster of Topoi, and then we have the universities that is like maybe the most important university of Göttingen. That is particularly Jens. I was at Göttingen too for a while, so we will tell about that. And then Berlin as well. And of course, our publisher Brill. So let me say that a joint publication of a manual of a handbook is always a high-risk undertaking. So the number of editorial teams who do not speak to each other after completing such a volume is alarmingly high, because it is, like, as I said, a kind of experiment in scholarly cooperation. So that was not the case with us. So thank you, Jens, again, for your wonderful and peaceful and fruitful and pleasant cooperation.
Yes, Isabel, thanks to you. I have to return this thought, and we would like to show you how harmonious and effective we still collaborate by holding this presentation together, which of course each of us could have given on his own. But yeah, it was a nice time to work with you, and yeah, I look forward to other projects with you, Isabel.
Yeah, thank you very much. So how did this book come about? So there are many people involved, and I have mentioned already some institutions, and it is impossible to list them all. And of course, there are, first of all, the authors themselves. But such a volume doesn't just take people, but it takes a lot of time. So it took a whole 11 years before we could hold it in our hands. Because a collected volume is a very long adventure you have to consider, and particularly a handbook. And like a child, it needs patience and love, but also a firm hand until it takes shape and flourishes. And so many things and little accidents happen. It has, in other words, a very long biography. So, Jens, do you remember the beginning, the birth of this book?
Yes, of course. And it was one of the lions, quote lions, that István just mentioned, of this committee that approached me. It was Professor Feldmayer from theology, and asked whether I could produce a handbook on any given city in the Middle East. He would do Athens and a colleague would do Rome, so he would need a book on any given city. And I researched a bit, found a very good monograph on Damascus, found quite a good monograph on Cairo, and then looked for Baghdad and only found Lestrange's, or Lestrange, I'm still not sure how to pronounce him, Lestrange's monograph from the 1900s. And I thought, oh, if this is the state of the art, I'm sure after 100 years or 110 years of research, we can say more about Baghdad. So the idea to create a comprehensive history of this important city started to grow in my mind. I not only wanted to focus on political history, but also on cultural, religious, and architectural aspects of the city. And because our focus of the research center was on education, there should have been a whole chapter on the city of Baghdad as a center of knowledge and education. At the same time, after I discussed the idea with Isabel and we came up with a concept, we decided to somehow question conventional chronological things or conventional ideas about Baghdad. For example, the concept of the round city, I would like to talk to you about more at the end of the presentation, or the concept of the Golden Age, both two important ideas I'm sure all of you know when talking or have in mind when talking about Baghdad. We started to request for contributors because it was also quite clear from the beginning that we could not write a book on Baghdad on our own. We invited them for a conference. So the first idea started to come up in 2011. Then we prepared for a conference in 2013. 2 years, the first 2 years were partly conceptual. And then I asked Isabel, I wanted to have a partner in this big project, and I asked her to join me, and she was eager to put in her thoughts and her networks. And by this, we were two scholars joining efforts, joining energy, with a shared background in early Islamic history or early Islamic culture, but still from different universities with different at different points within the career. I was just made junior professor. Isabel was an established postdoctoral researcher. So we joined forces and started the project when, Isabel, you all of a sudden were no longer in Germany. And this somehow, made it difficult to continue. What happened?
Yeah, well, in 2012, I went to London for Marie Curie. And it was a year that I spent with Sarah Savant at the AKU. I was in many places, not in Exeter. I'm very sorry about that, but I was in several places. I was in Cambridge, I was in Oxford, but my basis was in London. However, during all these times, so I was 2 years there, my connection to the Freie Universität, where I had been since 2006 and where I had met Sen yet. So we have to say that our first meeting took place in Berlin because he has for a while he was in Berlin too, and had recently finished his book on Damascus history. So one of the common interests that we have is about city history. So I have published a book on Al-Heyday, which is an early pre-Islamic city, and Jens on Damascus. So. But the connection remained first via my association with the Topoi Cluster of Excellency, and then as a private lecturer or Privatdozent. It's a bit difficult to explain what that is, but that is a kind of title that forces you to teach in a university without just having the title and having the honor, but not getting any money for it. So it's a very German institution. Anyway, the good thing about that, you have an institutional affiliation. So in a way, I was Londoner and Berliner at the time. So, and that was the reason why it was possible then to get support from the Berlin University for organizing this conference, the 2013 conference in Berlin. So it was a wonderful conference. The belated Joseph van Es was keynote speaker, and that's one of the reasons, but not the only one, because he's such a monument in our field, that we dedicated the book to him. Well, the idea of this conference was to, and that was the idea of the publisher too, was to base a conference on pre-circulated conference papers, and then take these, discuss these conference papers on the conference, and then convert these chapters into book chapters. But, however, no speaker submitted anything of that, so we didn't get any paper in advance. And later on, some of the people that presented did not deliver any chapter. So there were a lot of shuffle and reshuffling that took place after that. Well, that in a way, the conference was the fun part, but then the work started.
Yeah, and I would like to speak about one or two challenges you face if you want to edit the handbook. For example, I mentioned that Isabel was abroad. To mend this, I brought her to Göttingen. She was in Göttingen for 2 years as a postdoctoral researcher, so that we could collaborate very closely. This was from 2014 to 16. Of course, we then asked the contributors who did not pre-circulate their papers to post-circulate their papers as soon as possible. We gave them a deadline of half a year. That was absolutely unrealistic because only one of 23 contributors gave us his paper in time. And this was Damian Janos, and I have to mention his name here because he was the only one who stuck to the deadline. Thanks, Damian, if you are around. All the others gave us their presentations or their chapters after a while in different states of completedness, in different languages, of course. Of course, all of them wrote in English, but the level of language, of knowledge of the language was different. What I want to say is that we worked a lot on what we got. Of course, we had to harmonize, we had to edit, we had to check for even sometimes the meaning and the language issue. It took us, I'd say, the longest time, I guess 6 years probably, only to get the papers in the shape we wanted to have them. I mean, in the shape referring to the content and referring to the edits. In between, there was my tenure evaluation in 2015, which took a lot of energy, effort, and time from myself. I wasn't able to work at least for 1 year on the handbook due to my own academic career. So at the end of 2016, when Isabel left Göttingen, instead of being finished with the handbook, we only had 60% of the whole process done, which, yeah, we expected differently, but we learned it the hard way, I'd say. Isabel, what happened after 2000?
Yeah, well, the Baghdad adventure continued. Okay, so I left to Mainz in 2016, but I maintained my domicile. I was still living in Göttingen, so I was just commuting, and we had then continuous and very intensive meetings here and there. So after the evaluation process of Jens, and almost all of them were in Göttingen. So what happened in these meetings? As Jens has told, so it was revision of the contribution, the revision and partly finishing of contribution. We have to say that some of them were really drafty, so we really had to add from our side a lot of parts of the articles. There were a lot of overlappings, and so we had a lot of discussions with the authors, so where to put one theme or the other. Some authors were easier than others. Well, I won't mention any names, but you know, these kind of diplomatic complications that appear when you want the people to stick to a certain idea and to have a kind of structure. Because if you have a handbook in front of you, you have to cover certain themes, and authors tend to want to have their own agenda and want just to say what they always want to say. So because it's like part of their research, but we wanted to cover, like, had an idea of which themes had to be covered, and that made things sometimes a bit complicated. But we both have our networks. I think we both have some kind of diplomatic skills, I think, and so we managed to do that. So I have to say that many of the meetings took place at Jens Scheiner's country house. I would say that's where he's living. So he likes this kind of countryside living in nearby Göttingen and surrounded by peacefully cackling chickens, because he has you still have, haven't you? Yes,
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I think they were extremely relaxing in the mornings to hear them cackling around. So Baghdad was produced partly with German chickens in the surroundings, and a lot of intensive conversation on long walks in the woods. So, and I have to say many thanks for the hospitality in rustic Lower Saxony, Jens. And then comes another challenge. So then came the COVID crisis. So, but funny enough, so it was in a way kind of very productive, because we worked particularly intensively in the book during the Corona period, because so they see there was something good about. We had a lot of time, and I spent like, I think 2 or 3 times. I was 1 week, we had a kind of closure meetings and nobody bothered us, and we could like do some of our things with our computer, so we didn't have to leave, and that was very productive.
In fact, that was the final stage of the production, and COVID really helped us due to the time we got for the project. In spring 2021, so 1.5 years ago, we gave the manuscript to a native speaker for correction. Almost a year later, in January this year, we added the images. The book is full of images. If you flip through the pages, 150 images on throughout the whole book. In March this year, we got the proofs very quickly. In May, the index was prepared, and in August, the book was out. So the time we needed in the beginning really accelerated over the past months. But all in all, the project lasted almost 11 years, and this is what the title wants to allude to, you know, 700 years of history on Baghdad and 11 years of research on it, basically, to produce this book. And of course, we have to thank all our family and partners and friends that they gave us the time, that we were so patient. And now the baby, quote unquote, is here. You see an image of the title, but you can probably get a grasp on the book in your library. And we hope that readers can learn something from it and can appreciate the effort the 23 collaborators put into this book. Yeah, that's from my side. And to recap, if you want to do a handbook, think of a longer time frame than you would do for a volume of collected articles. Choose your contributors very well. I mean, very well. Not only due to their expertise, but also how they collaborate, how they are able to take critique if you criticize the content of what they write. And it's a lot of pain, basically, or it took a lot of pain. Of course, also joy, but you need to be very steadfast and continuous. And would I write a handbook again? Isabel, would you?
I need a break.
I would definitely.
I wouldn't say, I never would say no, but I think I need a break. What is true is that, well, it's true what Jens has said, but sometimes you get to learn the people in a different way. And the moment they get here, you are the editor and the others are the authors. That's a different position that you have. And sometimes, so people that you might be very nice and excellent in their expertise, then turn out to be like not very reliable paper deliverers, and sometimes it's a bit of complicated. But anyway, I think we were in contact with many people of our fields, and we are, because of all these pains, we are particularly proud of it, because it was like not easy, and so it's really a big achievement to have it in our hands and this thick volume. So I will now move on to give you a kind of overview about of the book. So first of all, the thing is, we have like 2 criteria to put into place, so the space and time. So what was our criteria to decide what belongs to Baghdad? It's not that easy, because in a way Baghdad has turned out to be like the placeholder for all Abbasid story as such. So the guiding principle was once to have a spatial approach. It means to focus on political, social, cultural, and economic activities that took place in Baghdad's large urban area, which covered some 7,000 hectares. I will, if I show you here, that is the map or of the city that you will find in the historical atlas of Islam. So by hinterland, we refer to the alluvial plain around the city that is characterized by the channel of the Tigris, the the irrigation canal system connecting the Euphrates and the Tigris, and the fertile Diyala plains, and as well as the irrigation canals watering the land east of the city. So I move on to a next map. So there you see, first of all, you see Baghdad within Iraq. So the southern part would be Iraq, and the northern part, what you see in the north is like, do you see my arrow?
Yes.
No. Oh yeah, okay. So then you see in the north, I'm sorry. So here, that is Al Jazeera, and there you see Iraq, and there you see Baghdad right in the middle, and right at the place where the both rivers come the closest, and that's the particularly fertile area from there. And on the other side, you see the part of where here you see Baghdad, so, and you see the canals a bit better that connect both rivers, and there you see what you see here is the Diyala plains, that is like that what nurtures the city. And that was like broadly the area we wanted to focus on, because of course the hinterland belongs to the city, and a city of this size can only survive with this kind of broad hinterland. And yeah, I will not go into details what Iraq actually is, Iraq in the historical Iraq, of course, but yeah, you see here, as I said, you see in the north, you see Al Jazeera, and that the southern part would be the Iraq, and then that's the area where you find Baghdad. That was on the one hand the spatial approach, and then we have the chronology, and one of our goals was to go beyond like the usual tipping points. First of all, before Baghdad actually was founded, what happens in 762, that's the famous foundation by Al-Mansur, but we wanted to look at this landscape before Baghdad was actually founded, and so we included also what we would call the late antiquity background, and that would include like the area of Ctesiphon, which is not far away. If we go back to the map, that is actually, I'm just looking at this, where Madain would be. I think here's the arrow. So you see that I think it was like 50-80 kilometers between both centers. So Madain, where in Islamic times we have Madain, that's where Ctesiphon was. That was the capital of the Sasanians. So again to the time. Okay, that was the one like frame that we wanted like to go beyond that, and the other one was the usual tipping point of 1258. That would be the conquest by the Mongols, because usually like the narrative tells that Baghdad was completely destroyed and that everything like went down after that, and as we yeah, also not discovered, but thanks to our contributors, we understood better. Baghdad continued to be maybe a place of more regional significance, but it continued to be a city. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes we think about. And so the second volume after the 14th century, what happens then? But anyway, we decided to go beyond that magical tipping point of 1258 and include a bit, have a kind of view into the Mongol area, where Baghdad, in a way, yeah, was transformed into a Persian place. But yeah, that is the so. And generally speaking, we have subdivided the time frame in the just a second. Okay, so in the usual, caesura, so we have 2024. That is when Ardashir, so it is when actually the Sasanian Empire started. Then we have the so-called foundation of 762, when Al-Mansur founded this palatial city. Then we have 945, Ahmad ibn Boye conquered Baghdad, and then that's the beginning of the Buyid Empire. 1055, when the Seljuks start to seize power. Then we have this short period where we have the Abbasid late caliphs again dominating the city, and finally 1258. So Now let's move on. So to have a short look on the table of content. So we have, on the one hand, we have a preface where we have a kind of abstracts of all the articles. So if you have a look on that, you will also have a kind of general overview. So then there is an article written by us both about the topography and social composition, because that was not like part of the chapters composed by the contributors, and a historical sketch. And then we move on to the different sections. These are just the sections, not the articles. So then we'll have a look on the sections. So you see here the foundation of Madinat al-Salam, the historical overview, that it was like the chronological part. And then we move on to thematic sections. So first of all, Baghdad and the connections to other empires. Then the Abbasid court, and topics like literature, poetry, and these things that are connected to the court culture, institutions of learning and fields of knowledge, and the religious communities. So we want, of course, to include all the other people. They were not Muslims too. So we have a section on Jewish people, on Christians, and so on. And then a quite large, I think it's a quite large section that was written by Jens Scheiner again, on the original sources, very useful, because he goes through all the written sources that we have at hand, and then some maps, and then the usual things, list of further readings, index, and so on. So let's have a look a bit more in detail. So let's start first with the foundation and its legends. So first of all, so you see here from the title, I will not say like many things about every chapter, but these are about all these legends about the foundation. Then we have a contribution on the Islamic art and architecture. So one has to say that is one of our problems, because it's very, very, very few buildings are preserved, and archaeology is kind of, it's a big problem, because we really do not have access right now to the archaeological remains, if there are any. But anyway, what is to be said is said by Bernard O'Kane. Then we have a small section on the horoscope, because Baghdad, of course, was founded in a very special horoscope context, and you will find the horoscope still now and it's regularly quoted in the internet. So we wanted Johannes Thomann, who's a specialist in this kind of things, to make an analysis of the horoscope. And then I won't say anything about that, because I would spoil this section that will be presented by Jens after this overview. So then we have the historical overview. I think that I do not have to explain too much. So this, like say, the special things is like the first part, Ctesiphon and surroundings. That would be the late antique background and context. And then we have the Baghdad under Mongol rule. That would be the section on what happens with Baghdad after 1258. Okay. So the next section, as I said, the Baghdad's neighboring empire. So we have first, so you see here the problem with the point with Baghdad and the Abbasids. So sometimes it's a placeholder for the same, but anyway, we have here some interesting chapters on the Abbasid and the Byzantine Empire, Abbasid caliphs and Frankish kings. And what is very special, we have a short section on Abbasid relation with the Chinese empire by Angela Schottenhammer, who's a sinologue. And so it's a very interesting short overview on what we know about that. So then we have a section on the Abbasid court and its legacy. So on poetry, on court culture in general, by Letizia Osti, of course, the specialist in this topic. Overview on belles lettres, and discussion on Golden Age. So maybe we have later time to look at this legend of the Golden Baghdad and what happens. So institutions of learning. So we have first of all Sebastian Günther from Göttingen, of course, who on the knowledge on learning in Baghdad, a small section on Medinan scholars, and then a larger one, the one of Damien Janosch, who, by the way, is the one that Jens mentioned as the first contributor that really delivered when it should be delivered. So then we have on religious communities, and then you see we have, first of all, Sunni and Shia traditionalism, and then we have on the rational theologians, the Sufi school of Baghdad, Christian communities, Jews, and Zoroastrian, Manichaeans, and Gnostics. So we really wanted to express as much as possible the diversity of this city, which I think it's a very important point to consider. So as I said, we have these appendixes and index. And yeah, are there any gaps? Yes, of course, we haven't said everything. So you can like think about all the things that could have been said also. Like, for example, a detailed portrayal of Baghdadi women. So of course, the women, the point with the history of the female, of the half of the city, of course, who were women, is always a kind of problem because of the sources. But some of the things we know, but we do at that moment we didn't find people to do that. But maybe on for example, of the role of women in as donors of peers endowments. That's one of the spheres where you can like have a have access to a women's life. So urban social movements in general, and the reason for the frequent street violence, which is like something that we'll find again and again in Baghdad. That's very then the Baghdadi underworld that would have been interested. So slave soldiers and the role of the military also. That's a very important point too. And that was one of the reasons why Samarra was founded shortly after the foundation of Baghdad. But later on they went back. So the military was always very present in Baghdadi city life. Climate history, of course. So intriguing facts as, for example, that the Tigris was sometime frozen in that time, so that it really was sometimes very cold in Baghdad at the time. And things like financial markets, or because the section, so the chapter written by Richard Bulliett is more on the agricultural background and not that much on the economy within the city. That would have been interesting, of course, to look at. So what are the reasons why we have these gaps? Of course, one of the reasons sometimes you do not find the person at that moment that really is available, that can write on that, and these kind of like circumstantial reasons. But the main reason is, of course, the scarcity of primary sources and of archival material and documents. That's a general problem for that time, but particularly in Iraq, because many things are not, so we do not have papyri, for example. That would have been very important for that. And of course, what I already said, the scarcity of material remains. So they usually used very fragile building materials. So, for example, burnt and sun-dried bricks on wood. So these things tend to disappear very fast. So it's very difficult to find them. Then there were numerous natural disasters in and conquest of Baghdad, which sometimes led to the massive destruction of buildings, as far as we know. So we have a relatively limited building activity in the late Abbasid and Mongol periods compared to previous centuries. So that is normally what you preserve from other Islamic cities, and that's the time when particularly Baghdad had a kind of time of, I wouldn't say decline, I do not like the word, but of kind of contraction at the time, so that there were not many building activities. And by now, the very few excavations that have taken place in Baghdad have not brought to light much new evidence. Of course, we have the problem in general that, of course, Baghdad is still a living city, so it's not easy to make excavation. But normally what could be possible is in the moment you would, for example, dig out for a garage or something like that, and you can have this kind of rescue excavations. But so specialists are like not, some say one could find things, others say not, but anyway, it has not been found. So and other problems as I said, Baghdad is used as a placeholder for Abbasid period as a whole. So you will find people that work on, let's say, women in general, but so in Abbasid times, but not women in Baghdad, for example. So then you have many political actors and cultural agents of the early centuries were either Baghdadis or had spent longer periods of their lives in Baghdad. So it was sometimes very difficult to decide whom to discuss in our chapters, because in a way, like, everyone was Baghdadi, because everyone at some moment in their lives had been in Baghdad, at least in the early centuries of Baghdad, and everyone wanted to have the nisba of al-Baghdadi, so it was sometimes difficult to decide whom to take. Tabari, for example, who has not a nisba of Baghdadi, but he spent most of his time in Baghdad. So we put him in, but others, for example, that we would have imagined as Baghdadis were not, as for example, Ibn Mukaffar, to put an example. So like everything that happened in Abbasid time was centralized in the Abbasid court. So it was difficult to make decisions in this regard. So I think that would be like a general overview on the book, and I would now hand over to Jens, because he wants to introduce to us one of the questions, one of the research questions that are related to Baghdad, and in a way it is related also to the scarcity of material remains. It means, was Madinat as-Salam a round city? So
yes.
Please.
Thank you, Isabel. Would you mind closing the presentation, and then I open mine so I can flip through the slides?
Okay, yeah, I will do. So just a second, I have to understand how to do that. I will, well, first of all, yeah, here I see. Because we're, so, did that work?
Yeah, 1 second. Now I'm opening my slides. Tell me whether you can see it.
Yeah, but it's not the presentation mode.
Just a second. Yes, here we go. Yeah, one of the intriguing questions that arose after we have read all the secondary literature and the contributions was whether Madinat as-Salam was a round city. And I'm going for the final 10, 12 minutes to give you some insight into this argumentation and our view, our take on this issue. Of course, you would say immediately, yes, it was. Before I start, I want to thank Christoph Knüttel, who wrote an intriguing MA thesis under the supervision of Avinoam Shalem into this regard. I got inspired by this MA thesis. It was unfortunately not published. I addressed Christoph to publish it, but he never produced it. So Baghdad, you saw the map, was of course not round, but what about the city of peace, the Madinat as-Salam? All the literature is full. I just quoted 4 or 5, give you 4 or 5 incidences here, references here. Lassner, of course, speaks of a circular city, a perfect circular round city. El-Hibri in the New Cambridge History of Islam. 2 Arab scholars even called it round Baghdad. So they somehow overemphasized the issue. It's not Madinat as-Salam, Baghdad is round, which of course never was. The EI3 speaks of the round city, and even The Guardian in 2016 presented this very nice image of a very wonderful roundish or round, perfectly round Madinat as-Salam. If you Google round city, if you Google Madinat al-Mansur, if you Google Madinat as-Salam, city of peace, you come up with lots of images. The most fancy one to the top left, a computer animated around Baghdad. Of course, you have other images in the top, and even Arabic versions in the center, and all goes back to what I have put down to the right, which is Herzfeld's reconstruction from the 1920s. Creswell copied it, Lassner copied it. So the first very impressive image is on the right. Perfect circularity. So if you see this, the question shouldn't be discussed anymore. Also, the other evidence is quite convincing. The Arabic sources speak of Mudawwara. So the city is Al-Madina Al-Mudawwara. We find several references with At-Tabari, with Al-Yaqubi, with Al-Khatib, Al-Baghdadi. And then of course, somehow I think it's unisono. So it's a communis opinio in the secondary literature. Baghdad, the Madinat as-Salam was round. We have the drawings and images I presented to you. And then as a last argument, we even have architectural precursors. For example, Ardashir Khora near Firuzabad as a round Sasanian city. You see an aerial photography at the top and a drawing from the Deutsche Archäologische Institut at the bottom. So the evidence is quite conclusive, is quite safe to come up with this conclusion. But, and there comes a very strong but, I wasn't convinced by all of these arguments, and in the following, I want to present an argumentation that somehow questions what I just presented. For example, let's start with the term mudawwara. We find so often in the sources. As you all know, it's a passive participle of the second form of dal, waw, ra, dara, yaduru. Lane has the second form as dawwarahu. He made it mudawwar. Very interesting. He translates with an Arabic term, but then he explains in square brackets, mudawwar means round, meaning both circular and spherical. This is Lane's wording. I forgot the second quotation mark. So he would say, he would express or translate mudawwara as he made it round, circular, or if we want, roundish. What I get from this interpretation of Lane is that circular is not the only translation of mudawwara, but something roundish. So let's say an oval, or let's say a round shape, which is not a perfect circle, is still included in the term mudawwara. So my first conclusion was mudawwara might mean a perfect circle, but also an oval shape is possible, is a possible meaning of this term in the sources. Let's really evaluate the Arabic sources. In several historical and geographical sources of the early 10th century, we find this portrayal of Baghdad, of Madinat as-Salam, as mudawwara. For example, in Al-Yaqubi's geography, in Ibn al-Faqih's geographical work, in At-Tabari's famous chronicle, and in the quotations we have from Waqi. So if the source really existed, Waqi is our fourth source from the early 10th century. And then I asked myself, why is this feature not mentioned in other works? For example, why doesn't Yaqubi speak of a round Madinat as-Salam in his history? And why do the travelogues of the late 10th century, for example, Al-Istahri and Ibn Hawqal, who visited the city, did not mention this feature of the city? So my second conclusion was, wouldn't a visitor who was in the city mention this important issue if the city was really so unexceptional, so circular, so perfect? Why wasn't it mentioned? And I admit this is an argument from silence, so I shouldn't put too much effort into this argument. Instead, I look into the preserved accounts, and I will provide you now the translations of 2 or 3 accounts that deal with the issue. And I start with Al-Yaqubi. Give me a second. In the translation by Daniel, who writes, I, Al-Yaqubi, have begun with Iraq. This is the geographical work, Kitab al-Buldan. So he says, I started with Iraq because it is the center of the world, the navel of the earth. And I report about Baghdad because it is the center of Iraq, so the center of the center, and the greatest city. It is the center of the world because it is in the 4th clime, which is the central clime where the weather balances. And he continues to speak of Baghdad. In these 3 lines, we have at least 5 times center. So Al-Yaqubi's depiction of Baghdad is a centralized one, if you want to understand it this way. A couple of pages later, he continues speaking about the foundation of Baghdad or Madinat as-Salam. He, al-Mansur, marked out the city in the month of Rabi al-Awwal in the year 141, which is July or August 785. He made it a round city. Here, the term Mudawwara comes up. And apart from it, no other round city is known in all the regions of the world. So what I understand from al-Yaqubi's depiction of Madinat as-Salam is that it is a very central issue. It is exclusive and it glorifies the Abbasids. So this for me is a depiction full of topoi, full of motifs that speak for a literary agenda in this work, not in his history, but in this work, in which we find parallels between Abbasid authority as the central power and urban topography as a perfect circular center of the world. If you study At-Tabari sections, you can come up with a similar conclusion. I don't do so now for time reasons, but to me, al-Yaqubi follows a literary strategy and does not report what the city was about. Now let's focus on the second source, al-Waqi'. He is only quoted, his traditions are only quoted in Khatib al-Baghdadi's Tarikh Baghdad, so 150 years later. Again, the problem of sources and quotations comes up. So we have to believe that Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi quoted Waqi' correctly to accept the Mudawwara issue as an evidence of roundness. Let's take this for granted. Let's say Al-Khatib quoted him correctly. Still, Khatib comes up with two traditions, and I present them as well. First tradition, Waqi' related in his account, which I have received on his authority. So there is a direct connection between the two scholars here, or supposedly a direct connection, that the city was round, again, Mudawwara, and encompassed by round walls. The diameter measured from the Khorasan gate to the Kufa gate was 1,200 cubits. Sorry, there's a typo here. And the diameter measured from the Basra gate to the Damascus gate was 1,200 cubits. So Al-Khatib quotes Waqi' and he gives some figures, some measures indicating a perfect circularity. Yeah, 1,200 diameters, cubits from both sides makes it a perfect circle. A circular shape can be deduced from this quotation. But then, 2 pages before, Al-Khatib quotes Waqi' with another tradition. Quote, Muhammad ibn Khalaf, which is Al-Waqi'ah's other parts of the name, they say, so anonymous sources, he, al-Mansur, fixed the length between the Khorasan gate to the Kufan gate at 800 cubits and from the Damascus gate to the Basra gate at 600 cubits, which would, if we draw this, make Madinat as-Salam being oval. Oh, sorry, this is a big mistake. An oval shape is indicated. So we have two contradictory quotations or traditions quoted by Al-Khatib. And now Al-Yaqubi adds to this second quotation, and saying, and sorry, this is Al-Khatib adding to this quotation, Waqi' related in his account, which I have on his authority, that Abu Ja'far built the city in a circular form. Khatib chooses the first tradition because a circular city has advantages over the square city, in that if the monarch were to be in the center of the square city, some parts would be closer to him than others, while the sections on the round city are equidistant from him when he is in the center. So Al-Khatib, and excuse me for having here mixed up with Al-Yaqubi because I'm quoting here Al-Khatib. Al-Khatib interprets Waqi's term Mudawwara as circular, as perfect circular,
because of his centrality, exclusivity, and perhaps because of his perfection. So Khatib discards the second tradition with the oval shape and focuses on the circular tradition of Waqi. He does not discuss the oval option. So my third conclusion would be, we have contradictory evidence in Waqi's traditions, but they are understood according to the literary agenda of presenting Abbasid centrality as circular. Again, I see a strategy here by the compiler Al-Khatib to read perfectness and centralization into the traditions. Even more, Yaqubi and Tabari were both from Baghdad. Yaqubi for some time lived there, Tabari lived there for a very long period. So their literary strategies were meant to create a glorified image of the time of the Abbasids' return to Baghdad. So remember, the early 10th century was the time when Al-Mu'tadid left Samarra and re-established Baghdad as the new capital, or the old new capital of the Abbasid Empire. Al-Mu'tadid also reconquered areas in Iraq and in Syria, and somehow re-established the early Abbasid Empire. At this period exactly, in the early 10th century, scholars present Baghdad as the center of the world, as perfectly circular. And yeah, so I see a connection there for the Sitz im Leben when these texts rose or were written. Now let's reevaluate the secondary literature. And by this, I would like to reevaluate actually previous scholarship. So how did these people, these colleagues who studied Baghdad work? For Lestrange, Herzfeld, and Lassner, we can see that they picked the traditions, the Mudawwara traditions that showed a perfect circle, and omitted those with the oval meaning. Some of them gave reasons which were more convincing, others less convincing. We see, for example, Lestrange said, the oval tradition appears untrustworthy. Appears, no argument. To me, this is a very unconvincing argument. Herzfeld, even stranger, compared Madinat as-Salam to the palace of Uhaydir and said the palace of Uhaydir in southern Iraq served as a model for the city of peace. However, the palace of Uhaydir is a rectangular building, and Herzfeld redraws the palace in a real nice rectangular form. So how this could be a model, I'm not sure. He doesn't explain. And Lassner simply says oval traditions, or the one by Waqi, is an error. No argument, still not very convincing to me. So my fourth conclusion would be, previous scholarship only arbitrarily discusses the evidence. And attached to this is the images they drew and the architectural precursors these scholars provided. They said, of course, we have round circular cities, Firuzabad, I showed you the image. On the other hand, we have several other cities that were oval, and they are also late antique and older. For example, Parthian Hatra, and I gave you an image of an aerial view of Hatra, and you see, yeah, it's somehow roundish. It's neither oval, but it's not perfect circular. So why would the precursors, the perfect round precursors, be the one that Madinat as-Salam was founded after? Why not a more roundish space? Also, the images they presented, these scholars, they drew a perfect circle because they could do so, and it appealed to their imagination. Again, to me, this is an arbitrary discussion of the evidence. Final point, let's take the eye of the beholder. And this is a point Bernard O'Kane raised when we discussed the issue in course of writing the book. Would an observer on the ground have seen the city as circular, roundish, or oval? Question mark. The answer, if we imagine the size of the city and someone standing in front of the walls, he could not have decided whether this was a perfect circle or an oval or whatever, in particular if we take the 28 towers into account that were within the wall between the 4 main gates. So what I'm saying is the shape of Madinat as-Salam can only be grasped by from an aerial perspective, which was impossible to take at that time. And this is why all the images, or many of the images I showed you, are taken from an aerial view, from an aerial perspective, either because of you have a photo with a plane or because someone drew it from above. So conclusion. The terminology in my eyes is ambiguous because mudawwara can mean circular and oval. The Arabic sources have to be distinguished in that Waqi's evidence is ambiguous, could mean circular or oval because of the measurements that are provided. Al-Yaqubi's and the Tabari's presentations follow a pro-Abbasid agenda. So this is literature. This is not a depiction of what stood there. And then previous scholarship discusses evidence arbitrarily and offers imaginative, perfect drawings on the basis of their selection of evidence. Architectural precursors are ambiguous. Again, I showed you an oval one and a circular one. And for the viewer, the shape is irrelevant. In conclusion, the evidence to me is not quite as conclusive as I presented it in the beginning. Which means that ultimately we cannot be sure that Madinat as-Salam had a circular shape. It might have been roundish, or even oval. And only newly discovered sources, literary sources, or an archaeological excavation can decide the issue, in my eyes. But in the meantime, to remind you of the complexity of the issue and the possible oval shape, I published the following image in Emily Seeloff's textbook on Baghdad. You are sure you're aware of it since she is from Exeter. And I reproduced the image here. You see the general trend of the Tigris and the palatial city of Al-Mansur in a bit, roundish oval shape to remind you of the complexity. And with these thoughts and the final image, in which Baghdad is not, or Madinat as-Salam is not produced round, but with 6 sides as a hexagon, I'll leave you and thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take questions. I'm not sure whether we should continue the presentation or go into Q&A because it's 10 past 7. Isabel, what do you think?
Well, I don't know. Ishrwan, you say if I get like 2 or 3 minutes, I can add something about the golden age, which in a way is connected to what you have said because the circularity is a point.
Okay, so my suggestion would have been anyway, let's go on.
Okay.
Because it's so interesting and hopefully some of us can stay longer. So
yes, Jens, would you please unshare? Then I share
yes, again. Let's unshare, and you take over.
Okay. So there we are again. Yeah. So you see the screen yet now? Yeah, you see. Just a second. Where? So, okay. So, so Baghdad right from the beginning was, we already heard about this perfect planning, this perfect circular shape. Was not only a real city, but it was a mythical place from its very beginning. So, Al-Mansur planned it exhaustively as a perfect, providential, and beautiful palatial city. Maybe not that much as the sources suggest, but it seems that he really had something in mind about founding a real important city that would symbolize the beginning of a new era. So the round shape, I think we don't have to discuss it further because Jens said a lot about that. So the circular shape. So the name itself, Madinat Salam, indicates that it should be seen as a paradise on earth and symbol of the new era, as I said. Then we have the horoscope. So we know that he asked some famous astrologers of the time to design a horoscope and to decide when to found. Johannes Thomann has investigated that, and we know that it was like a post-event horoscope. But anyway, that was important from the narrative itself, from the legend, to make that clear. The sources, interesting enough, always emphasize that it was the most favorable climate, that it is so agreeable. Anyone who has been in Baghdad is like a bit surprised by that, but it is what they say, and probably they compare it to Basra, which is really like hell on earth. So in comparison to Basra, Baghdad is like nice and moderate climate. And of course, the idea that it's the center of the world. Then actually it became then, after the foundation, it became the place to go, and that's a part of our volume describes for scholars, literateurs, and fortune seekers from all over the place, from Iraq, Syria, and on every other place. It was a booming city, and it was the center of the caliphal court. But it was at the same time a place of nostalgia and decline. So first of all, actually what happened is the city of peace of Al-Mansur was soon abandoned, and so the landscape was filled with fields of ruins and dispersed settlements. I can show you here two maps, one of the city, or how it looked like. Well, let's put the roundness aside, but how it looked like in the early Abbasid time, and then what the people saw in Buyid, Seljuk, and Mongol period. So we see how the different areas of the city like were separated by fields of ruins. So it became soon a symbol of the bygone Islamic golden age and glory, and populated by arrogant inhabitants infatuated by their past days of glory. That's very interesting that many of the people say that. They come to Baghdad and they meet these people, and they still like hang on this past time of glory. So it became a kind of symbol of a site of nostalgia, an icon of human impermanence. For example, we have here this quotation by Ibn Jubayr, who visited the city in the 12th century and like says this kind of, in comparison with its former state before misfortune struck it and the eyes of adversity turned towards it, is like a faced ruin, a face washed out for the statue of a ghost. And then we have connected to that this myth of the total destruction by the Mongols, which represents the end of the glory of Arabic culture in general. And so it is connected with this idea of the dispersion of the book, of the famous libraries, and so on and so on. So if we look at the emergence of the myth, we can see that it emerges like very early after the civil war in 809 on to 813. So that is when the famous fitna between Al-Amin and Al-Ma'mun. And from then onwards, the time of Harun al-Rashid, who still was caliph in Baghdad, became the idealized time when everything was as it should be. And another thing that contributed to that the gradual crystallization of the early Abbasid age as a classical period for Arabic Islamic culture as a whole, and that's something that probably happened in the middle period among the Mamluks in that time, when like Baghdad became the symbol of this age of the classical time. And it functioned as a referential archive of knowledge for future generations. And so that 1258 became like the symbol of the destruction of this culture. So that is like the early myth, but it became its experienced a real like renaissance when European Orientalists in the 19th century connected this myth to a kind of decline and decadence discourse that partly served to justify colonial aspirations. So the idea that anything that is valuable in Arabic culture happened in Baghdad and was destroyed in 1258, so that the Europeans have to come to like help to reconstruct that. And in a way, it was taken over by Arabic intellectuals and poets of the Nahda movement. They took over this myth of the golden age and transformed it into a new icon for Arab nationalism. So they saw it as the place where that happened, what they want to happen again in their in their land. So, and in a way it still happens, because the exposition of Baghdad in the Qatar World Cup time, so in a way it shows that even the Qataris or the Arab world sees itself as Baghdad as the symbol of the past glory. So it became also a symbol of a counter narrative to a Eurocentric idea of classicism. So I have here quoted this verse by Ahmad Shawki, where he compares Roman Athens to Baghdad. And so it is important to have this in mind, because the consequences are that all the sources we have, almost all, are written from an idealizing, nostalgic perspective right from the beginning. And that happens to the round shape as well. So, and the legend is so powerful until today that it colors contemporary popular accounts and scholarly studies in East and West in both sides. So important for us is to underline that we have an extraordinary city in front of us, but it's not unique in the Islamicate world. We have other likewise important cities that have to be looked at. So the urban life continued after the early Abbasid period, and also after 1255. That's 58 that's very important. And we do not have like a continuous decline, but a kind of rather contraction and expansions in the time. So that we have to, from this perspective, to have other perspectives on the city. So there are interesting questions that can be related to Baghdad. We can see it as an example of a failed city planning, because in a way what Al-Mansur wanted to happen did happen, but it happened in a different way. And the round city or the roundish city disappeared or did not function anymore. So it is also an example of Iraqi booming city, and that it was not the first one. Basra boomed as well very soon. That fell apart after a few decades of spectacular flourishing as booming city. And we can think about how much it was nurtured by the enormous investments made by the centralized and functional financial apparatus of the empire. So that explains a lot what happens in Baghdad. So we need this idea of this functioning state apparatus behind that. Then it is a site of spectacular wealth and vivid culture, which attracted all kinds of cultural and intellectual agents and offered the opportunity to make a living from their talent. So, and it made the emergence of bookish culture possible, because these intellectuals could live on their talent. So you could really make a living as an author in Baghdad, because you had a market and you had a reading audience, and you had sufficient readers, you had sponsors, and so on. So that was a place to go for an intellectual of the time. And then it also witnessed many centuries as important regional urban complex, until it again became a capital, this time of the nation state of Iraq in the early 20th century. So this period in between, we didn't look at that in our volume, because we had to stop at some moment, but I think it's an important thing to consider and to think about. And as the chapters in our education section show, so Baghdad continued to be an intellectual center until the 14th century, thanks to its many madrasas and scholarly infrastructure. So the same Ibn Jubayr, who complains about the decadence of the city, in the next pages describes how he visits the madrasas and is so astonished and amazed by the wonderful khutab who are speaking there, like Ibn al-Jawzi. So it does not really show a city in decadence. So that was like shortly look on that. And now we really want to thank you for your attention, and let's start the discussion. So I'm very much looking forward to it. I answer now. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much to both of you. I think it was amazing, and I will abuse of my chair position because there are some things which came to my mind, and they may be interesting to discuss shortly. So there are 3 points I'd like to raise. Meanwhile, everyone else is collecting their questions. And okay, so the first thing is parallels. It's to both Jens and Isabel on Jerusalem. I attended a talk of Milka Levi Rubin, and she quoted texts describing the Holy Land with Jerusalem in concentric spheres of holiness. So there is the same circular, not for the city, of course, but the circles of holiness is there also in Jerusalem, which is an interesting parallel. And of course, the decline then is these beautiful descriptions of the decline, which we find all over in Middle Eastern literature. That well, we have also them in the Bible about Jerusalem, possibly about other cities as well in Middle Eastern, ancient Middle Eastern literature. But the Bible is clearly one, which is very influential. That's on the roundness and the decline. And one more comment on the Golden Age. As it happens, I'm writing a paper on Ibn al-Muqaffa's use of the myth of Golden Age, which the term he didn't use, but the concept he used very much. So it is interesting that Baghdad, well, and the whole Abbasid dynasty was probably conceptualized, well, it was conceptualized certainly by him as a return of a Golden Age for the Abbasid dynasty. That was his ideological stance on how to justify a revolution. And interestingly, he is probably taking that from Sasanian ideology, what he translated, and then he reapplies it to the Abbasids, and then the Abbasids build on this tradition, literally build on this tradition. So it's a city which meant to be a golden age at its construction already. Yes, so these two comments you may want to reply, but before, because I don't want to forget one little lament in the spirit of the decline. Such immense work what you did would not count anything in the current REF system in the UK, because edited volumes count for 0 in the REF, which is outrageous. Yes, that's one thing. And before I forget, I want already to advertise our next Majlis, and I will do by Alexander Hoffman, who will talk about what makes a man. Nizam is Majnun in a network of masculinities, and I will put the whole advert here into the chat, and would like to ask everyone who is here to subscribe as soon as you can before forgetting it, as we do. Okay, I'm not successful in copying it, but I try again. Okay, so yes, yeah.
Yeah, first of all, what you say about Jerusalem, yes, because it's a city that is imbued with religious and dynastic and many other meanings as well. And you can, the clash between expectations and what you find, that's something like that's very familiar. So the people come to Baghdad, they have this idea of Baghdad in mind, and then they are disappointed. That happens until today. I think if we would go to Baghdad, well, I think at the moment I wouldn't be disappointed anymore, because everyone announces this kind of disappointment. But this kind of tension is like very productive in a way, and it seems that all the poets even like went there to see that kind of decline thing and to see that. And what you mention, in a way, we have a kind of tension, and that's sometimes difficult to decide. On the one hand, I'm sure that Al-Mansur planned it as a providential special city, and you're right that he had and already the Umayyads did something with Al-Wāsit, so it's not a complete new idea, but they develop it further. and they have the Sasanian background, they have Ābbāsids and so on. So there are many, and it's a landscape of cities, and it was a tradition to found cities. That's Alexander is not the first one to do that, and it goes on and on. So what you do as a new king is to found a city in that area. That is true. On the other hand, we have the myth that happens after that. So that like transformed it into even more something of that. So it's difficult to know. So for example, the horoscope. So you see, on the one hand, I believe that Al-Mansur, because he's part of this background, that he would decide to make use of astrologers and to promote them as part of his foundation history, because I think right from the beginning he had his own history in mind. So he thought how I would be the historical founder of the city. I think he had that in mind. But actually the horoscope we find is not, it was constructed later. So it's sometimes difficult to make a difference between these two things. And where there's a big thing to think about how that emerges and what that makes. And some cities are, so the imagined city is like a big narrative its own, and that's interesting too. But we have a real city too, and that is what Jens was interested in. So did it really look like? And so we have a tension there. And maybe it's just a word to the golden age thing. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, the idea of golden age is not only about the past, but about the future too. So it's like kind of an utopian idea of what you want to like return to. And if the Ābbāsids did that, the Nahda people did the same. So the idea was always like, Baghdad is a place we want to go back. And it still happens today, as I said. And in a way, it works like that. And of course, you can like try to construct your own golden age and your own time, but it doesn't work that well. But after that, yeah, in a way he was successful, because you see the myth goes on. But Jens, if you want to add something.
Only one short thought on the issue. Wouldn't it be interesting to look into topological descriptions of cities? I mean, what Milka did with the circularity is probably another topos, another example for the circularity topos, which he discovered with Jerusalem. So that could be a further approach on the research, to look into topos. And Isabel, you did it partly with the legends, because it was not only Baghdad that had foundation legends. Yeah, so.
No,
it is not all history that is found in our books. So yeah, we have to somehow think of the topological descriptions as well. And the problem is, of course, how to decide which is which.
Yeah, Alexandria is another place like that. But the interesting, for example, in Alexandria, what I regard as interesting is that the archaeology has discovered that actually Alexandria was designed at first taking astrology into account. Later on, so, you know, a city evolve and get to something different, but it was like part of the founding at the beginning too. And something, so I'm sure that Al-Mansur thought about himself, what is his place in history? But yeah, it's complicated, yes.
So now I will stop the recording, and the live and only live bit will start with the questions. And I see Majida will have the first one. Now I'm stopping the recording.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much